Welcome to the Green Goddess Podcast. I'm your host, Tara. Today we have an excellent guest, Greg Lawrence, who's here as a psychedelic integration and transformational coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Tara. Thanks for having me. I haven't seen you since I was in Portland. That must have been like 2 years ago, right?
I think so. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember you were doing a really awesome talk about microdosing iboga, and
Yes.
we connected about hape medicine.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and I'd really like to hear about that too. But first, let's talk about psychedelic integration. And in particular, I'm really interested. I know we have a lot that we can cover, but I'm really interested in the subject of resistance because you mentioned that that's one that comes up for a lot of people. How do we anticipate that sometimes resistance can come up during a psychedelic journey? And what are some tools we can use when it comes up, and how can we prevent it?
Well, resistance comes up for various reasons. Usually it has to do with things that are in, you can call it the subconscious mind that we really don't want to deal with. And for better or worse, your subconscious wants you to stay the way you are, even if things aren't working for you. We can be anxious, depressed, have OCD, and our mind is convinced that we're better off the way that we are. Um, and actually, the mind's kind of the culprit in this too. A lot of times we have suppressed memories. So, if you were 3 years old and you were separated from your mother in the store and a stranger was leading you around asking you who your mommy was, it would be absolutely terrifying to you. So, when that happens, it's a traumatic event. Your mind says, okay, you can't handle this right now. We're going to put this away for later. You have a suppressed memory, a suppressed fear. Now, that fear is really an incomplete process. You never completed it. It's an intuit fear. It wants to be done. The problem is, anytime you tap into that fear, like in a psychedelic experience, if you come across that fear and it wants to come out of you, it's going to come out of you the same way that it did when you were 3 years old. So you don't get to experience it as Tara now. You experience it as 3-year-old Tara. And that's very frightening. So your mind knows this is going to happen. It just doesn't want to go through that. It doesn't want to get rid of these things. It wants to keep them inside your body. And this is another reason sometimes people have unpleasant experiences with monsters and unpleasant visuals. Sometimes that's your mind saying, stay away from this area over here because it upset you before. Your mind's kind of like a simple nanny. If it was taking care of you when you were 2 years old, it would want to change your diaper and give you a bottle. And if it came back to you when you were 30, it would want to change your bottle and give you a diaper. It doesn't know that you can handle these things now, even though you couldn't when you were small. So it tries to protect you. This is what's really interesting about the human mind. All the things that we do that we don't like are really our mind trying to protect us. But
Hmm.
resistance, a lot of times, is coming from suppressed memories and suppressed fears that we don't want to revisit because the mind thinks that they're too much for us.
Fascinating. So,
Now
how
that
do we work with it if we start to feel anxiety and we can't handle it? What do we do?
Well, there's an interesting, one of the interesting things about psychedelics is they're sort of a lab where we learn life lessons. Um, One of the biggest lessons psychedelics teach us that is that if we resist, we're going to be stuck where we are, or we're not going to get through things easily. For some reason, under the influence of psychedelics, it will feel at times like you cannot possibly stop moving. It feels like your soul and the inside of your bones are in pain, and there's just nothing you can do to stop moving around and feeling anxious and thrashing and making noises, whatever it is you do when you resist. It reduces the effects of the medicine. But the important thing there is if you just can manage to relax against that feeling that you cannot possibly relax, there's a pretty deep healing that can take place. So, psychedelics are trying to show us that we need to relax in the face of resistance. And psychedelics have an interesting way of setting things up to allow us to feel things. It will show us that if we can just relax when it feels like we cannot possibly relax, it will allow very deep healing to take place. How you do that? Well, you have to go through some things. When I do preparation sessions with people, I help them talk about their past. Sometimes you need to shine a light on past events because we all have blind spots as to how we view the world and ourselves. Most of our beliefs are formed when we're very small, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Beliefs are stuck in our head. If we are not given a certain amount of love by our caretakers, we grow up to believe that we're unlovable. And that's not a belief that's easy to challenge. It's not like, we have beliefs about people of certain race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Those are easy to take out and say, I should really examine that belief because I'm not sure that it's right. You have beliefs about the way that the world is. Those aren't easy to examine because it's just the way that you think things are. So
Hmm.
those beliefs are sometimes challenged when you're working with someone in preparation. Bringing these things up in preparation also sometimes, it brings things up because it might help because they'll come up during the session and they're a little easier to work with once you've talked about them and shown a light on them. Sometimes it just gets them out of the way so that they don't come up in the session and the medicine can actually go a little bit deeper. The analogy I often use is that if you walk into a room where there's 6 inches of garbage on the carpet, you don't try to steam clean the carpet. You have to get the garbage out of the way. That's what we're doing in preparation sometimes when we're talking about your past and how that relates to the problems or issues you might be facing now. What leads to the habits and patterns that you don't like now? It's your past. Something happened in your past that caused you to behave a certain way. Sometimes when a third party can point that out to you, it's much easier to deal with that later in a psychedelic experience. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's been really interesting. Something that the plants have taught me is that, oftentimes one of the challenging core beliefs that we work with is unworthiness, not
Yes.
enoughness. A lot of people feel that way. It can, because of things that happen in childhood or whatever. But it's really interesting. There's a workaround for it that they've taught me. It's a mental workaround. It's really quite fascinating. I thought I might share it with you.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So if we judge or reject anything, we may feel unworthy because we are one with everything, with all of creation. And so if we
Mm.
cut any aspect of creation off from being worthy and good and lovable, we can actually then feel uncomfortable in ourselves because if everything is not okay, only some things are okay. Some things are lovable, some things are not lovable, or some things are worthy and some things are not worthy. We might have those qualities. Um, and we have to be like on guard about it is the way it can feel.
I
So it's
love
really
that.
interesting. Yes, it's really interesting. So if we can accept and praise all that is unconditionally, then we can feel unconditionally lovable too. It's a really interesting thing, but it becomes a bit of a fun little challenge too, because we get faced with unpleasant circumstances, sometimes, and it's like, how do I love that too? But it becomes a game, it becomes a game that we can play, and it's a really interesting game to play.
I think this is all, you get to a point when you're into personal development, spiritual development, and I think that they go hand in hand. It gets to a point where it is kind of a game all the time because we are constantly being triggered throughout the day. And there's always a question of why is that triggering me? You know, it's always interesting to me when someone, there may be a person named Bob who I think is a great person that you personally find annoying for some reason. So Bob is obviously not objectively annoying. He's annoying to you. That could mean that somewhere when you were small, someone said something about a person like Bob that led you to believe that Bob is not a good person. Or it could be that Bob reminds you of something, a person, a time, a place, or a situation in which you felt unsafe. But your body and your mind don't want you to walk around feeling scared. So instead they repel you. Like, I don't like that person. I don't like his tie. I don't like the way he talks. I don't like the jokes he makes. So it causes us to have reactions to people because we feel unsafe. So it puts space between us and them. That's always been very interesting to me.
Yeah, totally. That is really interesting. And it's fascinating too how our subconscious, the unresolved aspects of our subconscious, will magnetize experiences that match them. So I think you do energy work as well, right?
Yes, I practice something
Yeah.
called integrated energy therapy, which is angelic energy.
Yes. Wonderful. Oh, I love the angels. They're amazing. I mean, that's obviously an understatement. Yeah. Yes, I've worked a lot with energy healing, Reiki, angels, all kinds of amazing beings. And what I love is that it's possible to actually heal those traumas from the past, and it's possible to integrate those separated aspects of the self with these powerful beings that have that access. You can
Yeah,
go back,
absolutely.
right? Because it's all the present moment. They can go back into any, what we consider to be the past, and they can change it. They can change the emotional tone of it. They can shift things. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it's all because we tie meaning to things, you know.
Hmm. Tell me more.
We make things mean something. I mean, and I think it's in Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. He says, if you're walking down the street and you see a tree, you don't think anything of it. But if you're walking down the street and you happen to see someone who reminds you of an ex-girlfriend that you had an unpleasant time with, suddenly that bothers you. You know, why is it that a memory, something from the past, bothers you? It doesn't just go through you like other memories. It's because we tie meanings to it. We have to go back in
Mm,
the past and we have to remember things that happen.
yes.
We are meaning-making machines.
Yes. And it's interesting because it feels like the awakening that's occurring right now is actually about releasing meaning. It's about coming into the heart center. It's about being pure awareness and presence, right? And that's so
Yes.
challenging. I find that so challenging sometimes because most of the time, really, because I have relied on my stories to make meaning and context out of what's going on.
Well, that's how we're here, and that's what we've given ourselves. We've given ourselves a human experience so that we have some turmoil, so that we appreciate love when it happens. So that means we have a lot of negative things roiling around inside ourselves that we have to deal with.
Hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're
Just
powerful spiritual beings, but we're inside human machines. those have their drawbacks.
right. And what's interesting, you mentioned love, right? When we get into that energy of pure love, then it feels so good to be in the present moment.
Yeah, it does, and I believe that's what we came from. And I believe that at some point, we were like fish in water. So when you're a fish in water, you don't really appreciate the water. Um,
Mhm.
if you
Right.
if you wanted to appreciate the water, you would have yourself yanked out with the hook and flop around on the deck of a boat and almost stop breathing until someone threw you back in. Then you'd say, "Fuck yes, water."
That's a really good point. I like
So
that.
I think that's what we
Yeah.
do. We deprive ourselves of love through this human interaction with ourselves, so that we can appreciate it when it comes to us.
That sounds right. I like that. Yes. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit more about integration.
Yes.
So resistance, you said, was one of the most important subjects. Um, and we've covered just like what it comes from and what it can be like when it occurs. Did we talk yet about what we could do to avoid having resistance?
Well, one of the most important things we can do is to find a way to do shadow work. One of the
Mhm.
most grueling things that can happen in a so-called difficult experience with a psychedelic is this movie that we're shown sometimes of every single thing we've ever done that we're ashamed of. That is an
Yes.
incredibly rewarding and transformative experience, but it is grueling. You know,
Mhm.
one of the things that we hide from ourselves is the things that we don't want to see about ourselves. If we can get into some sort of shadow work and look at the things that have happened in our past that we don't want to see, especially things about ourselves and things that have happened that we don't like, if we can shine a light on those things, then we don't have as many of those crevices. There's not as many dark spots, and the dark spots are what cause resistance in us. We don't want to relax into it and see things from our lives that we think have upset us, that hurt us in the past, that we believe that we can't handle now, or that we might even be ashamed of. Looking at those things somehow through whatever method works for you goes a long way towards dealing with resistance. And sometimes that might be working with a therapist, a coach of some kind, doing the work yourself, but really examining your past, because this stuff all comes from your past. Really examining your
Mhm.
past does a lot towards addressing resistance. Good meditation practice will help you to focus on your breath and keep you still and help you focus and sit still through discomfort and through distraction. If you can manage to get that down to a certain extent, that's very helpful to you in meditation. Um, it'll shine a light on the dark places. There aren't many dark crevices. I'm sorry, that's what I said about shadow work. It will help you to steel yourself when you feel uncomfortable, because people who do hardcore meditation will sit through discomfort, know how to make the discomfort the object of their meditation rather than their breath. So it trains you to sit through things and be still. If you can do that during the psychedelic experience when you get uncomfortable, it'll go a long way towards helping your healing journey.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And really, if
So
you can just somehow convince yourself that all you need to do is relax in the face of something that's convincing you that you can't possibly relax, if you can just somehow let go and realize that you're not falling, you're flying, you'll be much better off.
thank you. So let's talk more about integration. Tell me more about the kind of concerns and questions that people have.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about integration. And there are a lot of different methods of dealing with integration. There are, talking circles that happen after ceremonies, which are great. A lot of people take some of the integration activities that you see listed, and I think sometimes mistake those for integration. Things like journaling or yoga are good for getting your thoughts down. Certainly, anything somatic like massages, yoga, energy work is great for getting that experience into your body, helping you embody the experience. But I think what's very important, the kind of work that I do, is helping someone figure out, you know, I think that this is an experience that comes from you. These experiences come to us and they plug into us and they allow us to quiet down the chatter that's built up throughout our lives and allow us to hear our higher selves, because there is a higher you somewhere that knows exactly what you need to do. Every once in a while, we make a decision and we just know it's exactly the right thing to do. That's when we hear our higher selves. We can hear that voice. Psychedelic experience affords us the same opportunity to hear that voice. That voice will give you a message. Unfortunately, because of the things we've been talking about, because we are conditioned to believe and not believe certain things, because we have what you would call limiting beliefs, because we are mistaken about certain ways that we act and certain habits and patterns that we have and what the causes of those, words don't work that well. So if you believe that you are unworthy, everyone you know can tell you that that's not true, but you don't hear it. Your mind has set up defenses against that. So psychedelics communicate to us in many ways. They'll communicate to us through symbols, visuals, emotions, sounds. They'll actually set up in situations where we will feel a certain way toward the experience because we need to feel that. People come out of a psychedelic experience sometimes and they're profoundly disappointed or sad. That just means that there's disappointment or sadness that's kind of built up in them and they need to feel it. So psychedelics will
Mm.
even take the rap at some time. Psychedelics will make us feel disappointed. A lot of people have had this experience. Like I had the experience in an ayahuasca ceremony. 30 minutes in, all of a sudden, I'm completely straight. Boom. So I'm sitting there pissed off because I didn't have the experience I wanted. And in that period of about 45 minutes following that, I learned three very important lessons because it set it up in such a way that I was feeling these emotions and realized why I was feeling them and what the cause of those was. But in integration, sometimes we need to figure out what the message was that we got from ourselves during the experience. Then we need to make
I'd
some
really
kind
like
of.
to know, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd like to know what were the three things you learned.
Okay. So the first one was I was sitting there um, pissed off that I didn't have this experience. I'm looking out a window and I'm going through it and ruminating in my head. Then I realized there are four people singing authentic Icaros. They were all fantastic musicians and singers with different instruments and chacapas and sights and sounds, and wind was going on around me. And I realized I'm missing this because I'm sitting here ruminating about something that I can't change. And I realized that I did that a lot. Something had already happened, and I spent a lot of time dwelling on it when I couldn't go back and changing it. And it was brought to me in such a way that I realized I'm actually missing this ceremony because I want to think about what didn't happen. I mean, what kind of a silly thing is that to do? I want to be mad that something didn't happen. I can't change it. So that was a big lesson for me. The second was it was cold in there. I had on a jacket, a long sleeve shirt, a blanket, and my feet were freezing. Now, the guy running the ceremony didn't have shoes on. I didn't know how he did that, but I'm thinking, he doesn't have the heat on because he doesn't care. So I'm blaming him, and then I finally realized I can put another blanket on my feet. I could sit on my feet, I could rub them. And then I realized something I never had. When I decide that someone else should fix something, not only will I wait for them to fix it rather than fixing it myself, I will suffer while I'm waiting for them to fix it, just to prove my point. Now I'm proving the point to myself. So I realized when I lay responsibility at someone else's feet, I will wait for that person to do something, whether or not I can fix it myself, and I'll actually cause myself to suffer so that I'll be more upset about it. And then from that, I realized that I enjoy being upset sometimes, that it's sort of comforting. That at times in my life, when things have happened, I've been isolated and I've been hurt, that at those times I've been upset. And somehow isolating myself from the pain and being upset got mixed up. Like I'm safe, I'm away from that now, but I'm upset. And that kind of got to be like a blanket for me.
Mm.
So those were all things that happened in the aftermath of experience when I really couldn't feel the effects of the ayahuasca. It was when I got kind of dumped by the side of the road, like, too bad, you have to wait for the second cup.
Interesting. Ayahuasca is a really profound teacher.
Ayahuasca
That's
has
putting
some
it
very
mildly.
strange and strong ways of teaching us things, yes. It is
Oh,
wildly
yeah.
unpredictable.
Wildly unpredictable is exactly right. Yes,
Yes. So in integration,
absolutely.
what's very important is not that just that we learn the lesson, but that we make some at least incremental change in the way that we are living our life or the things that we are doing. Some new
Yes.
thought, habit, or pattern. So you get done with an experience and you think, absolutely feel like the most loving person in the world. I am going to tell my partner every day how much they mean to me. And about a week later, you see that person and you think, you know what, they're busy. I'll give them a hug and I'll tell them later. The mind starts creeping back in. So it is necessary to sort of battle your mind, which is always going to tell you that now is not a good time to change, which is why the gym is full on January 2nd and empty on March 1st. Your mind will always tell you this is not a good time, and no one knows you like your mind. Your mind knows what buttons to push, and the mind knows exactly how to get you to do or not do something. You fight your mind and you make some change that is uncomfortable to you at first until it becomes a habit. When you first time you tried to drive a car, it seemed impossible to work the brakes and the accelerator and the wheel and look in the mirrors and watch for other cars. It was just an impossible task.
Hmm.
Now, if you got into a car and you tried to pay attention to how much you were steering and how much pressure you had on the accelerator, within a minute, you're going to be thinking about what you're having for lunch because your subconscious mind has taken that over. You do
Right.
something enough times and your subconscious mind says, I get it. This is how that works. And it takes over. You can use that to
Right.
your advantage. Now, see, there's some disadvantages. When we start thinking about things a certain way, when we do things like going to worst case scenario every time we think about something that's going to happen, that becomes a
Yeah.
habit. Your mind says, I get it. That's how we do that. You can use those functions to your advantage. And you can do things enough time that your mind says, okay, I get it. This is a habit. You have to force yourself to do things. And in certain instances, like maybe you've been hurt in the past when you were a child and uh, you're resistant to getting deeper in your relationship. You hold back a little bit in your relationship. Sometimes you have to put yourself out there and put yourself in a situation where you feel a little unsafe and a little uncomfortable in your relationship until you see, okay, I'm not going to get hurt. This is okay. This is not that. I'm safe now. So there's a process of making some incremental changes that will make a huge difference in your life in that period where there's a high level of neuroplasticity after a psychedelic experience. To me, that's the key to integration. What kind of change are you going to make? Because if you do not integrate with yourself, with a coach, with a therapist, or some kind of accountability partner, then you are just having a one-time experience over and over again.
Right.
There
Right.
are
Absolutely.
there are transformative experiences that happen where someone has the journey and just automatically now they make their bed every day or they act differently. But most of the time, those experiences fade, and you have to do something of your own accord to make some kind of change. That's
Hmm.
integration.
What's your favorite tool for changing the mind?
My favorite tool is using the mind against itself as a figure of speech. So that same process that we talked about where things become habits, you can take that same thing that's created bad habits in you and you can use it against itself. You can start
Mm.
doing things to make habits that make you happy. But like I said, it is a process that involves fighting your mind and being uncomfortable. You can come
Right.
up with the 5 things that your mind's going to tell you. I know exactly what my mind's going to tell me. It's one of these five things. And before you know it, there will be a sixth one. You'll be saying, I know those five are bullshit, but this one sounds really good. This makes a lot of sense. It's like
Hmm.
working with a person who can read your mind, and that's exactly what it is. Your mind knows what buttons to push. If you are aware of that, you can kind of drop back and realize, okay, this is my mind messing with me. It doesn't want me to change.
Right.
So I practice something called neurolinguistic programming. There's a certain way that brains work through pictures and sounds and feelings. And
Right.
if you know how that works, you can use some of those things to your advantage. You can make things less disturbing to you. You can make things more pleasant to you. You can combine things that are bad with things that are good to make one seem more like the other. A lot of interesting things you can do to create new habits and patterns and let old ones fall away.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, NLP, powerful.
Yes, it is.
So tell me some more questions that arise that or topics that you often share about when it comes to integration.
In integration, one of the most interesting things to me is people's view of what happened when they were young. So I will ask people, what was it like growing up? And in general, people say something like, well, my parents weren't alcoholics. They didn't beat me and throw me in the basement or anything. I had a pretty good childhood. And then if you let them know two things, I usually tell people we have a habit of doing two things. One is that we take ourselves as we are now, and we think about ourselves when we were, say, 7 years old. We just shrink ourselves down. This is something I learned from a book called Shortcuts to Mindfulness. It's called Me Only Smaller. So we take ourselves and we shrink ourselves down to 7-year-old size, and we imagine what happened. We think that's not a big deal. But we forget that we didn't have nearly the knowledge, resources, experience, and that we were essentially trapped in an environment. Right now, if you don't like something, you could ultimately go sleep in the park or in your car. When you're a kid, you're kind of trapped in the environment that your parents have you in. And there are things that happen when we are small that hurt us. Now, the people who hurt us may have had our best interest in mind. They may not have intended to hurt us. They might have been hurt themselves and not realize what they were doing. They might have been bad people. But the fact remains that someone hurt us at some point. When we
Hmm.
grow up, so this pain happens and we're kind of frozen in that pain somewhere inside. So there's a smaller version of you inside that was hurt somehow. When we grow up, we start to justify this and say, I understand that happens to everybody. Me, I'm a white male. I'm privileged. People have got it worse than me. I understand. I've been a parent, so I know what they were trying to do their best. But that is sort of dismissing the pain that you went through. So I usually let people know it's okay to acknowledge the fact that you were hurt at one time, and that whether it doesn't make the other person a bad person, but I think it's necessary for you to acknowledge that something painful happened to you. That's one of the most interesting things. I think there's also that sort of ties into forgiveness. If you are on a path of personal and spiritual development, it is inevitable that you will forgive yourself and others. You'll go through a process of forgiveness. And personally, to me, that process involves assigning and then assuming responsibility. So,
Hmm.
because there is a person in me that, regardless of someone's intentions, got hurt, it is necessary for someone to be responsible for pain. So that means that you have to blame someone, not to their face. This can be an internal process, but you have to say that person is at fault. I was 7 years old. I didn't do anything to deserve that. This is what they did to me. This is how much it hurt. And this is how it felt. And try to feel that pain and understand that you were not to blame for that pain. Then you can assume responsibility. Okay, now that person's not going to be one that heals you. You're responsible for your own healing. So now you can move forward in whichever way you are going to do and proceed to heal yourself. But I don't think that works very well. There's a kind of a spiritual bypass that goes on when people think that you can just forgive someone without ever blaming them for something. Because you don't forgive people for something that's no big deal or, is understandable or I might have done myself at some time. You forgive people for harm. So I think it's necessary to frame things that happen to you in a certain way and realize that someone did something that hurt you. It wasn't your fault. They are actually responsible. They are to blame, and that hurt was real. Then you can move on and go to your healing. If you try to heal without blaming, I think that's skipping part of the process, and it comes back to revisit you. And forgiveness to me is a process anyway. It's not like one day you just open up and all of a sudden you've forgiven everyone. Even when we have these perspective shifts during psychedelic experience, we realize someone's circumstances and we forgive them. There's still a little bit of that left, I think, sometimes, and it comes back, and you let it go a little more and a little more all the time as you progress.
Mhm.
Those are the two more common things and more interesting things I see, and a lot of the people that come to me for preparation and integration.
Okay, thank you. And so you said you also had some things you wanted to share about the one-on-one work.
Oh, you mean the therapeutic experience?
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think because of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, um, I facilitate integration circles here for an organization called Psychedelia in Los Angeles. So I have them out here in the San Fernando Valley twice a month, and then I trade off with someone. There are two that happen every month in Santa Monica, and I work with a guy named John Saul, and we alternate. And since Michael Pollan's book came out, there are more and more people showing up, and new people who haven't worked with psychedelics before, wanting to work with a guide, wanting that therapeutic experience, and a lot of questions about a lot of people. And this is almost universal. People come and say, "Yeah, I did mushrooms when I was in college, and I haven't done much since then." It seems like a lot of people did mushrooms in college and then moved on from psychedelics until Michael Pollan's book came out. But anyways, people want to know what's the difference between when they did mushrooms in college or at a Grateful Dead concert and a therapeutic experience.
Right.
And psychedelics in a group setting are much different than psychedelics one-on-one or alone. So in a group setting, one of the great things is that you get to work on your triggers with other people. One of the terrible things is that you have to deal with your triggers with other people. Things happen in group settings that sometimes get on your nerves, and they show you things about yourself. Um, when it's one-on-one and you're working with psychedelics are very different when you take them and you are engaging with the world around you in some way. When you're engaging with people, it's even more different. The effects seem to be lessened somehow. When you're just engaging with the world by looking at it and listening to it, the effects are at a certain level. When you cut yourself off sensorially by putting on eye shades and headphones, it is a completely different experience. It is much more powerful, it's stronger in its effects, and it catalyzes an internal experience that you may or may not have when you're just looking at things or listening to music or watching a movie or a show or talking to people. The internal experience is one that takes you through sometimes a life review. We've talked about this experience of sometimes seeing the things in your closet that you're ashamed of. Sometimes it will bring up trauma from the past. If you can, this is where resistance comes up a lot because it can get claustrophobic in this setting and you can be faced with some things that you don't want to face sometimes. But again, this is shadow work. Until you face it, it's not going to stop bothering you. Some people are suffering things like anxiety, depression, OCD, because there are things inside bothering them that they haven't acknowledged. You know,
Hmm.
um, losing the ability to experience emotions like anger and sadness um, really gets to people. Sometimes looking at your past and the psychedelic experience and therapy in different settings helps you face those things and helps you feel better. But the internal experience, the therapeutic experience, can be extremely intense. And it's one you have to be prepared for, and it's one you should probably kind of steel yourself for. Having said that, sometimes you warn people about possibility of getting unpleasant. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. Some people have a lot of shadow material and they're worried about things that are going to come up because they had a bad childhood, this, that, and the other. And then they have a great experience. It's very pleasant for them. You never know.
Hmm.
But I believe in informed consent, so I believe in letting people know. There's a possibility that you might be scared. We talked about this thing of being, separated from your mom in the store when you were little. You might find that fear in the psychedelic experience, and when you do, you're going to experience it the same way that you would if you were 3 years old. But those are usually a very short tunnel, and when you get done with it, that fear has been processed, and it might be out of you then, and you might feel better. Something's been lifted from you.
Hmm.
But psychedelics in the therapeutic setting with the eye shades and headphones, this is what they do in MAPS, NYU, UCLA, Johns Hopkins, even with highly trained therapists. You have an internal experience with eye shades and headphones, and then you do your integration or therapy afterwards.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a really great way to do it.
It can be, and it can be strenuous. It can actually be exhausting sometimes.
So what do you think is the best way?
I don't think that there's a wrong way to do psychedelics. There is a lot of people in the psychedelic community use the word recreational as a pejorative. And I'll just say two things about that. One is that my friend Ashley Booth once said, I prefer the word celebratory over recreational.
Hmm,
I
that's
agree with that absolutely. I love that word, and that's what I try to use now. But the second thing is, in the psychedelic community, we're mostly a very open minded group of people, and we wouldn't think of telling someone how they should interact with God. But some of us had no problem telling people how they should work with psychedelics. Now, some people want to enjoy another person's body or a concert or nature or what have you. I think that's absolutely fine. These things, these substances have been around since before people were here to put context around them and say how they should be used. Do I think that people should take high doses of ayahuasca in their bedroom by themselves? That's probably not a good idea. I think it's always a good idea to have a sitter if you're not used to a substance, you don't know how you're going to react to it. I think it's a very good idea to have respect for the medicines that you're using, but that's, ultimately my opinion. I mean, if I'm getting down to it, I think what you really have to do is you have to be safe and responsible, meaning don't hurt yourself and others. Outside of that, the way that you use psychedelics is up to you.
well said. Yeah, I think sacred medicines are amazing teachers, and they can be approached in many different ways that are all very legitimate. And what
Yeah,
works for
and
one person is just not going to work for somebody else. I mean, is going to be conducive, right? So, yeah, I think that's a great approach to be open-minded.
yeah, and I think there's a lot of truth to the old saying that you don't always get the experience that you want, but you get the experience you need. I
Right.
always tell people when they're worried about what they're doing, I tell them there's no wrong way to do this. You're going to do what it is you need to do at the time.
Yes. So, where can people find you?
People can find me on my website. That is psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. That is a rather long URL, but easy to remember. So
Thank you.
that's
And
that's my
are there,
website, and you can always find me at Greg at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com, and I'm on Facebook as Psychedelic Integration Specialist.
excellent. Is there anything else that you'd like us to know about your work?
My mission, I was a very different person 5 years ago. Combination of psychedelic psychotherapy and integration coaching has helped me immensely. So my mission is to try to help people get the most out of other states of consciousness. I believe these are very healing substances. Like I say, I think that you can use them however you want to, but ultimately they're things that can help you heal. They can help you be a better person. That's what it's all about. We need more conscious, loving, responsible human beings on this earth to model that very thing for others. I think
Thank
psychedelics are
you.
helping catalyze that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, Greg. It's been really wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you for having this show. I think it's absolutely wonderful. You're doing a great job so far, and it's great talking to you again after all this time.
Thank you. I'd really like to have you on again and go into the microdosing iboga and hape subjects. I think this would be really fabulous.
Love to. Just let me know.
Okay. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, Tara.
And thank you to our listeners. May the plants be with you.